Good. Well, thank you everyone for being here today to this webinar about WFS. Very excited. Thanks for everyone joining, being here in America. Yes, I am indeed streaming live from Montreal and our friend on Central Europe, I should say, and all the way most probably in Asia. Maybe some courageous one are actually still up. So it's great to be here today to be discussing this exciting subject. We've been working so hard at this WFS implementation. So we're very excited to be able to talk about it today, as you can imagine. One little thing, sorry for the, some of you maybe, with the actual time zones. Yes, daylight for Americans anyway, maybe other people's. We've actually changed time slots. So a bit of confusion there, but for the ones that have been, waiting for the last hour because of that hour change, well, thank you for your patience. Well, without further to say, let's actually get going. Let's actually get going. Voila. So, anyway, my name is Hugo Larin with the FLUX Immersive Team. As I was saying, very excited to be here today to discuss about WFS and this implementation that just got released at version 22.2. So that was what, 2 weeks ago? Okay. WFS in actually, SPAT Revolution, but most importantly, what WFS brings to immersive system. And this is what, we're going to kind of start to talk about before we go deeper in this. So, at the base, what we are doing here is we are creating those virtual acoustic environments, right? We're going to be positioning sources. We're creating an acoustic environment. And that's where we're basically, starting with this concept of WFS. And beyond that is the intent to produce a very stable soundscape throughout the audience. So when we're talking about diffusion system, and could be a live concert, could be a museum installation, various, diffusion system, we have got that challenge of, we obviously don't have a single listener. We have a large audience and we want to take some strategies to cover that audience. We're not always in that sweet spot in the studio, right? There's, diffusion system outside of that. And that's really what WFS gives us the ability to do, to produce that stable soundscape or wide area. Wouldn't say necessarily 100%. Well, you've heard maybe our little video introduction with our friend Johnny that was talking about, really felt like 100% was, of the audience was getting that stable image. So yeah, so that's another thing to do. And, maximum coherence of that sound scene, really have the feeling that, whatever you've created for a virtual environment, is, really being reproduced with a better energy distribution. So we could talk about advantages, of better energy distribution, while maybe, pounding less the left and right system, could be one of them. So yeah, SPL, and for SPL constraints, we want to be careful with our ears. So definitely the distribution of energy is welcome. For sure. Going on, more advantages of dealing with WFS and, and what it means for a diffusion system. But one of them is, moving away from these old paradigms of, the acoustic illusion. So I don't know how much you guys have been experiencing with immersive audio, but one of the reality, good old stereo, concept principles, I should say, this angular, this angular concept, and where, when a source is actually between two speakers, well, when you're panning the source, basically we are creating in our brain that illusion, that acoustic illusion. Now, so what does that mean? That means that we're attached to these speakers, and that's what I talk often when I compare other vector-based or angular or pan-pod-based strategy, which is basically a huge reality. We're using these speakers to create this acoustic illusion. So we're moving away from that. We're no longer, I even like to say often that when we're talking about WFS, is literally the loudspeaker system disappears on us, because we're no longer so much attached to these loudspeakers to create the images. Anyway, moving on, that sense of natural, and respect of timbre is really an important advantages as well to the equation. No doubt about that. Okay. Talking a bit, deeper, if you want, into the conversation of what's actually going on, because, granted, we're talking about advantages, but let's talk about what's actually really going on in WFS. So what we've got there, we basically got a panning strategy. We should say a reproduction strategy, but we are calling it a panning option anyway. but it is a reproduction technique that basically aims to produce or reproduce the real physical attributes of those sources. Talk a bit about the technology behind WFS. Um, so trying to reproduce this actual, those attributes. How? Well, we're actually going to be reproducing this with a number of loudspeakers. The WFS technique, is there to produce these artificial wavefronts, right? From instead of having a real source, right? We're in a virtual environment. So we're basically going to produce artificial wavefronts, and we'll get a synthesis that will happen, and it will be reproduced by a number of loudspeakers, typically a line of speakers. We'll explore those arrangements in a few seconds, okay? To give you some of the concept behind it. And then, well, something very different to actually, what we've been doing in FLUX SPAT Revolution, for example, with various spanning techniques that we have, the vector base, some of the position approach that we have at DBAP. In the case of WFS, we bring actually delay and amplitude. So not only amplitude is actually, the use of delay. And there's more than that, for that matter of fact. But at the base, important to understand that we are bringing a delay aspect. Okay, good. So, well, actually, maybe a little image, will kind of help reproduce or understand a bit more what's going on. And these comes back to some old principles from Eugen in the 1600s. My memory is correct. Sorry, I don't remember that exactly. But basically, what we're doing here is you actually see on the left side, those old principles and the old principle actually starts from the concept of a rock. And if you're to throw a rock in the lake, that actually, secondary wavefronts and we reproduce. And that's kind of what the principle started on. And later on was okay, how can we synthesize those actual wavefronts from a virtual environment and use a loudspeaker arrangement? And you kind of see some of those concepts here at the right. So yes, positioning instruments or virtual sources in the space. And sorry, I'll push back that microphone a bit. And actually, the loudspeaker system, with the synthesis, reproducing that, from, yeah, magic. Now, can we call it magic? No, I don't like to call it magic. Nothing is magic, but definitely, a unique approach compared to the other stuff that's out there. Okay. Good. Let's move on. Moving on. Well, you know what? Before actually to talk more and start more, actual slideshow stuff, let's actually dive a bit to kind of give you a little bit of a feeling of what's going on. Let me start to express to you. Actually, I'm going to jump right here on a little session. Is that working yet? That is working. Got a little session in front of me. What I'm basically going to show you here is a project that I've been working on a demo session that we use, and this is a symphonic orchestra. So all these little dots, people that are not familiar with the SPAT environment, these are audio objects in the space. And for that matter of fact, I actually could just set only my violins if I wanted to, right? These are all my violins. So these are the sources. So I was talking about creating an actual virtual scene, right? But that's actually what's going on here is we're actually building a scene, positioning, those objects in the space. And here, let's start with, a basic concept is actually, that single line, that frontal system. That's where WFS starts, a actual frontal system. And you see it right there with the line of 7 loudspeakers, equally spaced. We'll talk about that later. Now, what we're going to be able to do as well is actually go beyond the single front system, and we'll explore kind of the two options today. We'll explore the frontal and we'll explore the surrounding. So adding, side elements and the back elements. And that could be a perfect example of a standard theater, shoebox theater, right? There's a proscenium, there's a front stage, it's a square or rectangle, whatever box, and there's a series of loudspeakers on each of that, seating rank, and you typically maybe have some speakers in the back, right? So we'll explore that second option that we have, and more actually. I'm not sure yet. There's probably a little discussion about this, but we can actually go beyond this and in 3 dimensions. So domes and 360 arrangement. Now, how was I, building this session, because, today's not the conversation about pre-production, but the conversation of pre-production is often, important. And actually what I actually did here, and you kind of see the concept of multi-room, is I have a binaural environment or binaural, space where you can actually either see there's no actual speakers in it. So what's interesting about that, blank slate, well, yes, this is an environment to start doing a pre-production. That's exactly actually how I've built that session. Start with headphones, positioning the sources, driving some levels, working all my spat object mixing and perceptual mixing. But beyond that was actually being able to listen before. So that is possible with the multi-room environment. Actually, for that matter of fact, you could even go crazier and say, you know what, let me actually overlay, the objects, right? The overlay the seating map of that orchestra. And I could start to actually be more specific here, and say, well, you know what, the violins, let me place them. So really there is that possibility, as what you see is what you hear. Is kind of a bit of the concept, behind that virtual scene. Well, you could start actually, uh, you know, um, positioning sources based on what? Well, based on where they'll be seated. So that's kind of what I'm actually showing here. The ability to use that layout. For that matter of fact, now if I go back in my main room, you kind of see the seating of a symphonic orchestra with a four lines of speakers, two sides and a front, and with those position, I can obviously position all that. But obviously, that's not the intent of today. Kind of just showing you a bit where it's coming from, the possibilities. Here is an example of a symphonic orchestra. Definitely, one a big important use case, putting the static position and letting the magic of the reverb engine. We'll cover this briefly towards the end. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to our next portion of the presentation. So WFS and SPAT, what were we talking here? Well, WFS and SPAT is a new panning technique at the base. We're calling it panning technique, reproduction technique, spatial audio technique, call whatever. We're calling it an actual new panning technique. Okay. And it uses a minimum latency approach. It's important to understand. We've talked about delay. Some people may be already, well, okay, how much delay gets thrown in the equation because latency is key to system diffusion. So we use a minimum latency approach, meaning that the closest speaker to a source is at time zero. If there's any question on that, we can talk about it later, but the concept is as basic as this. So we call this a tight or a minimum latency approach, as simple as this, okay? No other option. That's what we're actually doing currently in the implementation. Next, well, we can use this on multiple rooms and arrangements. So you actually saw this from my previous slide where I have a front only and a full system, and I showed you the binaural. Well, these are rooms. They're virtual spaces with an actual stream format and arrangement defined for the output, for the render. So that's what we are going. But these multi-room concepts can be used for dealing with various audience zones. We're not going to talk about system and all the use cases. The list is long. But what we can actually say is this multi-room approach will allow you, for example, potentially to deal with a front fill zone if you add the density for it, potentially dealing with, a delay zone or other zones, a distribution zone. For that matter of fact, it could be a VIP seating with a surround, another complete, different system. Again, we're not going to dig deep here. Important to understand this multi-room is very powerful for doing this, for that matter of fact, okay? And as you see, position are shared. My sources, if they're connected to three rooms, three environments, the position, the properties of those elements are remaining, are staying there. And that's why I could do a binaural pre-production of this. Okay, good. What do we've got else? Well, the support of speaker arrangement, that's obviously an important conversation. Minimum 5 loudspeakers. This is where it starts. We're not allowing anything below that. Next is a collinear system. You've actually seen it. If you actually want, when we're talking about a collinear system, if you want, I could rapidly go back on where I was, right? This is what I was talking about. That's a collinear system, a line of speaker. And then obviously there's more option than this, and you already kind of start to explore it, and that is the ability to do circular 360 way all the way to 3D arrangement. So it's an all around, meaning we're adding side elements, we're adding rear elements, and potentially we are in a dome. I mean, there's no reason. That's one of the key things. We're very excited about this. Originally, some people that have been following us may say, well, Hugo, you guys have been working on WFS for a long time. Indeed, we have. And it started as a completely 2D only approach, and it was a frontal only approach at the beginning. And we've added the ability to surround the listener and went all the way to 3D. Bunch of challenges comes with that for sure. But that was the work that's been going on for the last Yes, the last little while. So very excited anyway, to have this available today. We'll briefly talk about this, the orientation. That's what basically means. There's a speaker and an orientation to create that, right? That diffusion, that loudspeaker array, or if you want. So good. Okay. Let's move on. Well, actually, before to move on, let me actually load another session for you. I'm actually going to be switching back to this. Yeah, sorry, I've got a new streaming system. We're using Ecamm now, for the one that are curious. Kind of loving it, but I'm new to it. So getting used to my remotes and all my stuff. But this is it. This is me returning to that. And let me just open a new session. We will start from scratch, no worries. But I'm actually going to starting with some use case and example here. Okay, let me load a little session so we can kind of talk a bit more about, some of the realities. So what I've done here for you, I'm using the multi-room concept again. And the reason I'm doing so is I want to start first to talk about, vector-based or these traditional panning techniques such as, VBAP or VBIP or hybrid VBAP, VBIP. I mean, anything that's angular based and or I should say direction oriented, direction based. We like that at Flux to kind of put them all together in a direction base. And by direction base, we mean that we are attached to an actual listener, right? What you've got in front of you is just me with a simple overlay. I can, hide this if you don't want to see it. This is a, frontal collinear system with an overlay of a venue, main audience, some rank in the back. We're not going to go too deep in that conversation again, but what I want to express here is currently in this particular setup, I am using a vector-based panning technique. The reason I'm doing so is I wanted you to appreciate one thing that's going on, and that is if my source is dead center, I actually have no signals going on the other arrays. And obviously, if I move towards this side, I'll have a similar scenario now because when a source is in between two angles, yeah, two speakers and the angles, we basically have, amplitude distribution over these 2 points. And you can actually clearly see it here, right? Speaker number one and speaker number two or would actually be playing right now. Now, I'm not going to go into deep modeling of and coverage and depending on the height of the speaker, but if you stick with me here for 2 seconds, let's just presume those loudspeakers are roughly 90 degree of coverage. Well, what's going to get interesting in this, and I just made those little lines to express to you that if that signal is being reproduced only by, speaker number one and speaker number two, thanks to the vector-based approach, well, that would be the red line from a 90 degree perspective coverage. What does that tell you guys? Well, everyone beyond that red line or actually won't get covered, won't get any intelligibility. If that's a critical signal, obviously that will be problematic. So just kind of expressing the vector base and the challenges. Now, someone could say, well, Hugo, you can actually use spread. And you're right. For the people that know SPAT, they could say we can actually start to spread the signal. And you'll see that some, signals are going on a bit more here. But the problem with spreading and basic spreading, and it's not something we want to touch deep today, and if there's a question, be happy to answer them, is the fact that we're sending the same exact signal to all those speakers. We call this correlated signals. And when signals are correlating and they're arriving in the venue, what happens? It's called cone filtering. Okay, so that's basically a huge challenge for a simple approach I'll say it. I'll say it. I promise. Will I say it? of Sorry, because I was actually kind of going on the fact of spreading. Thank you. I was actually going on the fact that that spreading factor does not exist in the next thing that I'm going to show you, and I can kill it right away. And is now moving to WFS, and now you see actually. So we're always on the same speaker arrangement, same overlay. I'm just changing rooms to actually change panning technique. And now you see what's going on. We actually have, and if I put this back center, it makes total sense. There's more signal, there's a gain distribution, and beyond that is the delay. And that is where, this signal is not correlated to all speakers. It's everything. It's that recreation of that wavefront. Okay? Makes sense. I like to think it makes sense. Now, so we've talked about these arrangement. We're actually going to create some together. If I'm moving to that next room, that is, the ability, as I said, to create, an arrangement, that's all surrounding the listening area, I should say. We'll actually look at surround possibilities. For that matter of fact, WFS is completely possible on a 714 or a 514 or an arrangement if you wanted to, could be a dome. And we're actually going to look at maybe importing as well. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's go back. Let's go back here for a second. Where are we? Okay. Now, well, we're actually going to start to talk about the speaker arrangement and how we create them. Okay. Because obviously it needs to be created. So, and we'll do some of that together, maybe from a fresh start. Yeah, we could maybe do it from a fresh start. That would be ideal. Okay, so let's actually jump right into this. The first thing, obviously, when creating speaker arrangement, well, there's really two options that get brought to you to the equation. A manual setup, what we'll show you. There's interesting tricks as well to create lines. I'll show you this right away. And then the other option will be to import from a speaker arrangements. And we have the ability to import from what? Well, from actual various, modeling software. Let me actually just go blank on this, close this session. I don't want it. Okay, let's start from blank. Hugo, how do we start with WFS? Well, as I said, it's a simple panning technique, right? So, a setup wizard, creates that environment. And what we'll be able to do is now to choose the actual, WFS as a panning technique. It is a channel based around, right? It's not ambisonic, nor it is all the other options that we have in SPAT. So we're going to be basically here in the panning technique choosing WFS. Now, if someone say, Hugo, it's not there. Why? We need 5 speaker. Remember, I just said it. So for the people that actually have SPAT Revolution already, you will see that we have these frontal line 5, 7, and 11 already created. I'm going to choose one for the moment here quickly to show you that since, I have 5 speakers, I have now the WFS option panning technique, and we'll get back into those WFS settings later on. But I was able to choose the WFS field synthesis. And here we are. If I scroll out, this is my arrangement. This is pre-created for you. Now, we're using this as an example. Truth of the matter is, you're most probably going to use it because the position of the speaker is actually, I'm going to say wrong. It's not wrong. It's just not the real position. And we'll talk about the importance of real position. But they're there for you as a start point. You could edit the arrangement. So let's go do speaker edit, right? So we'll click the little edit button, and we are now getting into our famous speaker arrangement editor. We could from there decide that line of speaker is actually beyond what we have now, 4 meter. We could decide to change it. Now, to remember in SPAT, every single arrangement pre-created from us, so pre-delivered, can't be edited without being duplicated. So let me just duplicate this quickly. Not going to even take the time to name it. And now I could obviously decide that this speaker line is actually 10 meter. Okay. So yes, you can edit from our actual arrangement. That would be one way of dealing with it, but starting from scratch is your other option, saying, this is my WFS theater that I'm creating, starting from a blank spot. And now you'll see there's, the ability to add speakers right there, and we can add them manually, and it's, something you can do, but it takes obviously more time if there's 50 speakers. But thanks to this little kind of add speaker deal, we can rapidly say, well, let's add a line of 7 speakers. We want a uniform line along one axis, and we'll choose that axis in a second. And we're going to choose the y-axis, the x-axis, which would be our line from left to right. This is the coordinate scheme in SPAT Revolution. We could choose the spacing of those speakers. Yes, in WFS, the spacing is key. Respecting an equal spacing, is the concept behind it. I'm going to choose 2.5 meter, which I like to think that is still an acceptable spacing. There are disadvantages of putting too much space in between, but that's not the end of the conversation. Distance is our distance. We're always talking from the listener perspective. A listener reference, I should say. Okay, so this is how we're determining a speaker arrangement in SPAT. Many reasons for it. We have a attenuation model that is based on that listener reference point. We have, obviously all these surround arrangements, the bubble, the ambisonic. So there's a lot of legacy that comes from, from that listening reference. So that's where we're starting. So easier. We have to define a listening reference point. In the case of WFS, I'll talk about it a bit later. It really is more of a matter of designing an average of that zone. I'm going to here determine that, you know what, we have a mixed position at 20 meters. At 20 meters, what in feet, Hugo? Sorry, sometime I got to do the translation. Yeah, so rough 60 feet. Yeah, that's not bad for a mix position. So 20-meter. Now the Z is for elevation. We're not going to talk about elevation here. We're in 2D arrangements. Apply. Okay, not valid. Yes, I know why, because I actually have probably not set to WFS. That's fine. Is that it? Why is it not being nice with me? Maybe I did something wrong. Uh, let me check. Maybe I did something wrong here. Yeah, that's another one here. Let me just start this again. Little line of speaker of 7 speaker x-axis at 20 meter. Okay. Voila, not too sure why I wasn't happy here. So here we are with the speaker arrangement that we've defined from a manual setup. Now you will see as well, and as soon as we actually move to WFS, you will see as well that there's a concept of orientation. And in theory, we'll talk about orientation. Indeed, we have a flat front orientation, which we'll cover. So yeah, creating from a blank slate, from the speaker editor, we can briefly talk about importing actually as well. We can import from what? We can import from FLUX. So you can obviously export your speaker arrangement from a SPAT session and save them, send it to another collaborator if you want. But we support as well from an Excel sheet, XYZ. There's a template online. And modeling software, Adamson, Coda, DNB, which would be from AriCalc, from DNB, Ease as well, and Nexo. For that matter of fact, I think I have as Ease. Yeah, I do have Ease right there, right? I can import from that actual export that came from an Ease modeling software. Gives us some option here to lower the arrangement to all to 0, for example. Not going to talk about this today, but yeah, as simple as this, we actually have imported that arrangement. Then we can transform it, rotate it. If the reference point was different than our reference point, which is the case, we can rotate the scenes and all that. So that's another option. Now we're going to talk about orientation. Currently, we are not importing the speaker orientation, and that will be an important part of our conversation as we continue on our presentation. Okay, so import from speaker arrangement or set up manually. We are using absolute real value. I've said it, I'm saying it again, of your system speaker position, right? 2.5 meters spacing between the speakers. The real value of the listening reference, well, as I was saying, most probably an average, is the ideal there. I touched this on the subject a bit later. So all these data, you saw me 2.5 meter, it's based around the actual real value, real meter value. Now, speaker orientation, contrary to any panning technique in SPAT, are taking into consideration. Very important. So what you see and what you actually are defining from an orientation perspective, we can jump into this in 2 seconds after, is very important. And that's what I was saying 2 seconds ago. Currently, from imported data from Ease, we are not doing the orientation. You have to do this manually, but hang tight. I already have a conversation with Nicola. Hello, Nicola, who's one of our team member about it this morning, and some are providing that data. So we'll be able to actually simplify the creation from the orientation perspective as it is important. But you will see, and we can jump into orientation right away because it's a simple thing to see. If we're actually going in this, you see that we are in an automatic mode by default. And automatic means what? Means two simple things. Either it is oriented to the listener or either it's defined as a line. So we have a bit of intelligence there. But the point is that you can change this. You can orient it to the listener, front, back, left, right, or custom orientation. So I can then modify that orientation. So one of the next steps for us will be from this import. from importing from from East, for example, grab the orientation data and put it properly, apply it properly here, so everything is done for you. But if you have to change it manually, you can change it. Okay, making sense for that? I hope so. Yes, yeah. Well, actually, even for that matter of fact, I could even add a line here. I'm going to add another line of 5 speakers to this speaker arrangement. I'm going to add it to one side. So it's going to be a linear uniform line again, not this time on the x-axis, but on the y-axis. I'm going to keep the spacing of 2.5 meter. Now the distance, I can go 20 meter if I want. I mean, maybe not as much, my well, I'm 7, I'm go 10 meter on that one. Okay, and apply 10 meter positive, so that will be on the right side. So there you see it. Now actually, there you see it. It's right there for you. All those speakers are oriented. We could change the orientation in theory. Not too sure if it's done it there. Was the intelligence there for us? Yeah. Yes, indeed. Actually, you know what? It did put it to automatic mode, but it's all oriented to the being side or right in this case. Anyway, you can change this if you know the orientation, no problem. Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. Going back to this little slide. So orientation, taking into consideration what you see the orientation. You kind of want to have it to match your physical location. Something that we never really ask people to do in SPAT Revolution in the past. Okay, orientation. We're always either in Cartesian or for non-sweet spot centering approach, we had basically no orientation, and for anything direction based, we had all speakers pointing toward the listener all the time, but it was not changing, for that matter of fact, the rendering, the processing per se. Okay, but in WFS, very important. Okay, aspect of the equation. Okay, so oriented to the listener by default. I haven't really shown it, here, but thanks to what? Well, thanks to the intelligence. When it sees that a line is actually there, or there's a line, there's a square, it will actually make them front, back, side left, side right for you. It's not going to be oriented listener. So some of the intelligence right there to to deal with that. Okay, moving on. Well, the listener, as I said, is used as the point of reference. Okay, so you could use a zone average if you're covering from 10 meter to 30 meter. Yeah, that would be a good way. Could be the mix position. Don't we always want to please the mixing guy? So we could put the listening reference as the mix position. If we wanted to, that could be definitely acceptable. And depending on the use cases, yes, there's other options there. That could be used. Okay, good. Moving on to talk about what? To talk as something that you may have seen or heard about last week on our webinar, or have seen as I was creating these arrangements. Maybe you saw something show up like something white behind the speaker line and was wondering what's going on. And that will bring us to talk about 2 things. Efficiency zone, which is a new feature, not fully related to WFS. Efficiency zone is beyond WFS, but it serves us quite well in the WFS approach. Number one. Number two is actually this focus zone. Now, some people may know about the concept of focus in WFS, and that is the ability to bring a source virtual in front of the speaker line, maybe to the ear of the listener, right? It's that focus that you could do with the source. Now, to do focus, you need actually quantity of loudspeaker, a great quantity of loudspeakers. Some people are familiar with WFS know what I'm talking about there. And we're talking about some very, very tight spacing to be able to actually get the focus zone to happen. So that brings to talk about, well, Hugo, is there focus zones in FLUX, SPAT Revolution, WFS implementation? The answer is yes, defeated by default. And we're going to talk about this right away. Okay. So it's an optional focus zone. Typically, we recommend with spacing to 20 to 40 centimeter. I think we say 40 centimeter, but the smaller, the better. And that's an optional zone. If I actually go right now and SPAT, because it's always great to see it live in action. And let me choose a speaker arrangement. Yes, WFS theater. Boom. Okay, we have a line, and I'm going to go in my output option. And you see here we've got efficiency zone right there for us. Now, by default, that focus zone, which is part of the efficiency zone section, by the way, in the output section of a room, the focus zone is off. And if I enable it, it's basically going to tell me on, are you sure you want to do this? You appear to have loudspeakers that have a spacing that's greater than zero point 0.4 meter. And a matter of fact, we have what, 2.5? Oh, 3 meter on that particular one here. So indeed, great spacing. So you can put it on if you want. And if we put it on, just so you understand, basically you have the ability to, we're basically changing the way that we approach what we call the efficiency zone, which I'll talk in 2 seconds. And that allows you to bring sources inside. Do I have a source here? I don't have a source connected. I do. It's just I'm not seeing it. I'll find her. Where are you? Oh, you're right there. Oh, sometimes because I'm getting old and I didn't put my glasses. Now I see it. Now it's clearer for everyone, right? A source that I can bring in this efficiency zone. Now, why is the red, Hugo? That has to do with what we call the protection zone and the distance model, which we're not going to talk about today. But the point is that we've just enabled that focus zone. Although, yes, with that 3 meter, it wouldn't be ideal if we close that focus zone. That zone doesn't exist anymore. And well, you'll get to bring the other conversation of why is the source locked to this? Well, it's locked to what we call, the efficiency zone. Let me switch back to this for a quick second here. And not that one. That would be bad. That would be better. Let's look at that. Okay, so efficiency zone defined behind the speaker, the system arrangement, not only for WFS, but we will talk about it from a WFS perspective today. What it brings, that efficiency zone, it brings two features, two important one, which is clamping and muting. By default here, we are talking about clamping to that zone. Make sure a source doesn't get out of something. And before we go back to SPAT to explore all this, it allows us to, define, a zone gets defined. Number one, it allows to do some clamping, so limit a source from where it's actually going. Define an actual depth. Same thing, not just in the front to protect, to clamp to the front, but clamp to the back. So limiting the actual attenuation level and where a source can actually be and live if you want. So defining a safe zone area, if you want to call it this way, a play zone, a source zone, a source playing zone. Let's call it the source playing zone. Okay. So that defining the depth. We can as well define a offset, or we call it to truncate. So a trunk, we call the trunk setting. So that's basically to truncate the start of. So we could even push it further away in the line. I'll show this to you. It'll make more sense in actual real action. And by default for WFS, and that's an important thing, we have a 0.4 trunk, and it's basically just we're basically clamping just before the line. Keep in mind, at the line, we're going, potentially to a focus zone. We're very close from the speaker. We kind of want to protect that actual line per se because of some of the computing challenges that can happen very, very close to the line. Okay. So yeah, we've got that by default. It can be changed, and we'll talk about WFS setting in 2 seconds. Okay. So going back to SPAT, because things are better when they're being seen, in real world, we have that speaker, that efficiency zone that gets defined automatically for you as long as we are in less than 180-degree convex. Now, I don't have an example of this, but basically I could add speakers right here, but as soon as I'm going to pass 180-degree, we basically are determining that we've got an efficiency of all around, okay? But under 180-degree, we'll be seeing that arc behind, that pie. We call it in French la pointe de tarte. So the arc behind, or that pie, would make sense. And that gets defined automatically. Now, what you see here, because of thanks of the clamping, and it's on by default, when a source gets outside of that efficiency zone, it clamps. It processes that source as if it was inside the zone. And that concept goes even when you go behind. So I was talking about depth, defining the depth. And defining our trunk is where we start. So now what we've actually just done here is we said to that source, that you're not allowed to actually come in front, closer than what? I've got 4.46 meter of trunk. that where it starts, and it's clamped there. It's clamped there. It's clamped behind. The source can't go anywhere. I can actually even drive the attenuation model, stop to drive the attenuation model as well. The source is clamped right there. Very interesting, by the way. It serves us. And if I go double click here and actually reset the trunk, I was talking about the offset, you see 0.4. This is because we're in WFS. You could remove this, but beware. There might be some challenges getting close to the line as far as processing. Okay, good stuff. I think so. Can I take a glass of water? I think I can. I think I'm allowed. I haven't stopped. Like that's a Hugo's tempo. How are we doing on time? 45. We're right there. Okay, whoop, let's just kill my face 2 seconds just to show you the WFS settings for fine tunings. They are available. You may have seen it. If we actually go back to SPAT, you have seen those right there. They are right there. Delay interpolation time, gain ramp scaling, gain scaling. Okay, and the reason I want to kind of bring these up is just to kind of talk about these options. They are there currently to fine tune the WFS. And it's not all parameters that exist. You can imagine that, and some advanced parameters, we actually use when we're doing specific things. But these are the parameters that we wanted to give to the users and to actually make some decisions. Okay, let's briefly talk about them. Gain time and delay and interpolation, gain ramp time and interpolation time has really to do with the timing, as we move from these gain zones, if you want, or these delay zones, okay, and the actual crossfade time, if you want, or the ramp time in the case of gain. So the interpolation per se, and that is one settings. Really, the thing that I want to bring up today is potentially the delay scaling and most importantly the gain scaling. Now, these two parameters could actually have been bonded together, changing the actual gain and delay scaling on the arrangement. And what do we mean by gain scaling? Actually, I think that the good way to do this is with a visual representation. Let me get a signal generator going in and unmute that room, and we can actually see that. Let me just bring that signal. So what are we actually talking here by gain scaling? If I actually look at this, is the ability with gain scaling to actually, and you can see it on meters, appreciate it on the meter for now, is basically at the zero gain scaling to have an equal distribution of the amplitude. We're talking about gain here, we're talking about amplitude, okay? Versus actually the opposite, which would be kind of us playing as how much, equal gain things are getting. So it's really for fine tuning. A perfect example how you may want to use this is, for example, for a listener that's very close to that line physically. Think about this one. I think that will be a very good example. I have a source to the left, and I've got someone in the listening area that's sitting extremely right, right? This other challenge of WFS, not WFS, I should say, but the speaker design in general. But what one reality here is that if I actually have the no gain scaling, there's obviously potentially a lack of gain of signals all the way around. The gain scaling for front fill, for example, could allow us to actually do a better distribution. You could do this with delay scaling. Now, if I kill delay scaling, what does it do? It kills the delay. You're in amplitude only. How to do WFS on amplitude only in a matter of a click? That would be removing without the delay, would be killing the delay scaling. Okay, making sense, I hope. Not want to spend too much time on this. We have a pre-filter that's really a spectral correction, a low shelf filter. It's off by default. You can activate it, but it will basically be there to compensate from the low frequency boost. When we're creating what we call the speaker antennas, there's an actual low frequency boost, so that filter would compensate for that. Okay, so that is an option that you have as a filter, as a correction, basically low shelf filter. Okay, that's right there for you. And beyond, last but not least, the blending. So why blending? Well, you don't necessarily want that, when signal comes in the front of the line or behind the line, to actually jump from an approach to another one. And why I say an approach? Well, when you're in front, there's a focus zone, right? Remember that. So what we basically have is we have a blending point, currently by default set to 2 meter. And that means that at 2 meter, we are moving to, in a case of actually collinear system, line of speaker, we're moving to a focus mode. So at 2 meter, you're starting to move into a focus mode approach as far as the rendering goes, okay? Versus being strictly on what some people refer as point source. We have to be careful. It's not maybe the point source that people know, but the point is from the traditional, behind the speaker line, virtual source, wavefront recreation. Okay. So the focus mode, we got that blending there. And if we are on a surround setup, meaning we're surrounding by speakers, we're actually blending to amplitude only, killing the delay. Okay. Just important to know. Could be actual, I actually like the amplitude thing. It could be interesting. You could define with that blending of, hey, I'm using pure WFS at that point, but when I enter inside, maybe I'm doing a lot of movements inside. Well, you're actually going to be using an amplitude style only, no delay. Not sure it's going to work. Just thinking this out loud, but yes, yeah, that would be a way to move to amplitude inside. Okay, that's inside the bubble. Okay, good. Yeah, WFS. More on WFS. Well, how to get it? That's the question. You know, actually, I've skipped something that I wanted to talk about in speaker arrangement. Some question will come up anyway, so I'm going to cover it there. Well, what's involved? I guess that's one of the questions. What's involved in getting SPAT Revolution WFS? Well, simply a license, okay? It's a SPAT Revolution WFS islands that you add to the iLock together with the Ultimate. The Ultimate license. It is for an option for Ultimate. And by having the license, it opens the panning technique, all those settings, and everything that comes with the WFS implementation. As simple as this. And so what does it do? It brings the reproduction technique to SPAT Revolution. Number one, as I said, as a panning or reproduction technique, as important to be reminded always, it's SPAT Revolution Ultimate only. And it can be basically bundle, take SPAT Revolution, do the WFS add-on. And as simple as this. No specific installation, no specific, file there. Well, if you open a file that was with WFS, well, it will open, won't be there as a panning option for you, okay? Important to mention as well that technical services are available. I've said it already. Loads of use cases, specific, setups, deployment. Can WFS be used? Should it be used all the time? I can even right away talk about, front fields. Should we use WFS on front fields? Maybe, or maybe not. There's a reason, maybe not to use it if someone is very, very close from a speaker line. And I like to say my rule of thumb for system design anyway would typically be, that at least my audio needs to be covered by 2, if not better, 3 loudspeakers. If I want to get some sort of a, of a sense of a spatial sense, I can't do this with 1 loudspeaker. So really, there's some compromise zones for front field, but maybe you decide to put 48 front fields all lined up on that 20-meter stage, and yes, potentially we could achieve some interesting things there. So it's very specific, and yes, we can't just use the WFS all the time. There's some things to keep in mind, and that has to do with immersive and speaker design, which is not the conversation of the day. Okay. Should I actually say, I don't think I have a slide for this, but I don't necessarily need a slide, to kind of wrap up on the fact that it's optional as a purchase, but it's actually included for all our subscribers. So all the subscribers that woke up on the 23rd, we're able to download version 51 that we're on right now and actually see WFS as a panning option. So yes, the power of the subscription for us is we give all these options and all the updates. So important for you to know, rental model per month, 12 per month, no commitment, 12-month commitment, 12-month commitment, 1 year, 1 year option with the WFS option. Very powerful. Now, we have, by the way, a promotion right now, and I'm calling it a promotion, but for people that are buying SPAT Revolution and WFS add-on, we actually are including the 1 hour of technical services, okay? The first hour is on us. That's what we're saying. For someone that has a specific project, needs the kind of the get-go, starting to evaluate the project, maybe make some deployment recommendation. With these technical services available in the first hour is on us, okay? So that's going on, by the way, right in the shop right now, for that matter of fact, when you buy both licenses, okay? Voila. I think we are done. Maybe just a little one on some use cases. And I can kill my face from there, and that will be better. We were actually all summer, although WFS was not out, we've been using WFS in the field. And one of our great partner is Espace Concept in France. If he is online, Alain, I send you my regards. And they've been doing several concerts using WFS. Their goal, simulate a concert all acoustic. How? Well, thanks to the reverb engine and those perceptual factors, which we are not talking about today. Basically, use the reverb engine to reproduce some sort of an acoustic environment at all, per se. 80 real-time microphone, static object position. You saw it from my session anyway, some sources position where the band is sitting, and then 14 diffusion point, actually used to reproduce, as a reproduction of those wavefront. Okay, and that's it. That was simple. 6 speakers in the front, in an arc for that matter of fact. You can see it on the picture, and then 8 speakers around the audience, kind of some side in the back. And that was it. That was the magic of it. Okay. Interesting use case. They've been doing this for outside. I mean, if you've got an outside symphonic orchestra, no brainer. It's the magic of it. Very simple to deploy. And as someone would say, you no longer need a console. Alain will say this. He say this all the time. The console is just there because it needs to be there, but really is put the right mic at the right position the source where it is or at the right place, let the reverb engine do the magic, and use, WFS for SPAT Revolution. Thanks for all being here today. I think that we are done with actually this presentation. It was really, really good to see you all online. Great to see you. Thank you, guys. And I will leave you to, I'll actually drop the video right now of Johnny Torchy for the one that missed the video at the entrance. Little 5-minute video talking about his deployment of WFS. Have a great day. Thank you for your support and being there. Cheers, guys.
The Neko Light Orchestra, the musical collective, had the idea of doing a marathon. The Neko Light project is really interesting because there are so many musicians on stage, up to 13. So the goal was to recreate the musicians' stage positions to give a sense of depth of field, which is really difficult to do on a stereo system as we can't get the sensation of distance from the source, though there are some ways that all the sound engineers will know. I wanted to work in immersive, but we could go one better and use WFS. I had no idea that it would be possible. For me, it was almost utopian. So we still had to define the number of sound sources that were going to enable us to do real WFS. As those who are interested in this technology will know, you need a certain number of speakers in order to create a credible experience. So we tried using 7 sources. Perhaps more would have been better, but nevertheless, it worked. I was confident from the offset. I even went out and bought the speakers in the week as I wanted to reproduce the experience and prepare the way ahead. Regarding the sound system, I used Karas in 7 clusters of 4 attached to a bridge in front of the stage, as well as Kivas in 7 stacks of 2 stacked on the stage. The Kiva stacks, of course, were on the same axes as the Kara clusters. For the mics and consoles, I used 2 Rio 3224Ds, a patch with 60 ins, and a CL5. The appeal of the CL5, of course, being the Dante network, which allows us to interface the SPAT Revolution on the MacBook Pro with a virtual Dante sound card. Using the direct outs, I sent nearly all the sources to the SPAT Revolution, excluding the more complex instruments that require several mics, such as the piano, the harp, or even the strings, on which I always have a DPA and a pickup. So the SPAT Revolution was receiving 50 audio channels, with SPAT's WFS audio engine itself generating 7 more that were attributed to each of the Kara clusters or Kiva stacks. The audio paths of the Dante and the SPAT Revolution passed through the Rio and hit the LA racks in AES. The appeal of the SPAT Revolution is to recreate a dimension. It's capable of generating a space, and in particular, the reverb linked to that space. This is something we can't do in a traditional concert with more standard tools. The concept is compatible with several audio interfaces. It works with Mac's core audio engine, so we can plug that into whatever we like, be it Dante, DigiGrid, or whatever. So we can install a small setup with ease. In about an hour, we can do what we want. I'm not suggesting that we can easily exhaust all of its possibilities, because obviously there are many parameters, but still, after 1 hour, we can create a setup that works. I have to say, I couldn't believe it. Straight away, the sensation is incredible, because we can make the sound sources all but disappear. Obviously, we're used to hearing the sound coming from the speakers, which is still the case, of course. This isn't magic. However, the speakers themselves disappear behind the sound field, that famous synthesized sound field. It's no longer the console doing the mixing or the summation, it's the SPAT. And the SPAT doesn't just do left-right summation, the SPAT does a virtual summation in a virtual space. Perhaps it's that that gives so much naturalness to the sources. That's the goal, in fact, to ensure that people are moved by the artist's emotions, and above all, to ensure that instead of having 15 or 20% of the audience in the centre with good seats, you know what it's like. Here, I was walking about earlier, and I'm almost tempted to say that we have 100%. Perhaps I'm exaggerating a little to say that 100% of the audience zone is good, but I really have the impression that we're able to respect the image that we want to portray, no matter where we are, both in terms of depth and breadth. And that's really incredible, because I don't know of anything else that would be capable of doing that on such a large audience zone. So after all these hours of work, what I felt in the FLUX studios, or at home even, I also felt here. Better even, inevitably. We don't have the same sound system. It's just incredible. I think that we go beyond that which we can do with stereo, or other known systems. We go way beyond. It's gonna be tough to go back.